Zoids has had a long and storied history in video games, dating all the way back to the Commodore 64 in 1986. Like the vast majority of Zoids media, very few Zoids games were ever adapted for English-speaking audiences. If you're at all familiar with the history of this channel, you should know how much I loved the Zoids Versus trilogy on the GameCube, and the Zoids Infinity arcade games was reported to the PS2 and Xbox 360. But after Zoids Assault in 2008, we entered the decade-long slumber of Zoids essentially being a dead brand in the West, as we didn't even get the HMM model kits properly distributed over here until relatively recently. When it was announced that the Zoids brand was being reactivated in 2018 with Zoids Wild, lots of fans were very excited. The manga, anime, and model kits were announced, and shortly afterwards was a tie-in Switch game to go along with it. In 2020, Hasbro decided to try their hand at releasing the Zoids brand in the West again, and we finally got the anime, one wave of the model kits, and this video game all released in the US. I did one lousy live stream with plans to do a full Let's Play series on this game when it first came out back in 2020, but I got busy with work and other projects and wanted to revisit it this year. But my attempts to live stream it again were met with technical difficulties, but more dire was a lack of anything really meaningful to say about this game in a live setting. So I just decided to play through the game casually, get some footage, and do a little review style video for you guys who are curious as to what I think. And it also gives me a chance to do a little post-mortem on the Zoids Wild brand, now that it's 4 years later and Hasbro has long since abandoned any interest in continuing to adapt it, or, tragically, its much better sequel series. It's worth mentioning that this game was published by a company called Outright Games, which is a publisher of low-budget games for kids and appears to be the go-to middleman for Hasbro to publish licensed shovelware. I'm not able to find anything on who the original developers were, but I'd be willing to bet that because this was purely a localization job, this game is significantly higher quality than the average game published by Outright. The game itself is a 1v1 3D arena fighting game, which is not uncommon for a licensed anime game, and the Zoids series itself has had several of these if we include the Infinity arcade games and Full Metal Crash. In terms of visuals, this game, in my opinion, actually looks head and shoulders better than I expected. You go in expecting it to be very cheap and low budget, but surprisingly, undocked on the Switch, the game's textures look okay. The environments, while not varied, are passable in detail, but the really surprising thing that I was really impressed by is just how good the models and animation of the Zoids themselves look. The way their armor and skeletons underneath shifts and moves with them, it's surprisingly natural looking and very fluent. Some of the attack animations just look really cool too. Like, I really love how the alligator Zoid has this tail lunge attack, and all those animations just really add to the fun of the gameplay. The game also runs extremely well with a very solid 60 FPS and never dip, but I admittedly never tried the game undocked, so I'm not sure if it will run worse in handheld mode. The campaign structure is very similar to any other fighting game out there, where you pick a character and move through a variety of different stages, and the story has to find a contrived way to make every combination of characters fight each other. It gets the job done, and it will definitely take you a few hours to get through it, since there are a lot more stages and characters than you would expect. Nearly every Zoid from the anime is playable, and aside from some alternate colors, there aren't any clones of any movesets. Each playable character is mostly unique. A surprising amount of effort was put in here that I really wasn't expecting. But in spite of the large variety of characters, one of the biggest criticisms I can give the gameplay is that the characters don't feel particularly varied to control. There are differences for sure, but it's not like in other fighting games where you have characters that are wildly different in terms of how they feel to control, and it's like learning a whole new game over again in order to control them effectively. Lots of characters here just feel slightly too samey, and I feel like this just leads to the gameplay feeling overall repetitive. I had to play this game in 1 or 2 hour bursts, as I would get easily burnt out trying to play any longer than that. This is where I feel like the game will disappoint fans of the older Zoids games. It's just lacking in features, variety, and different game modes that the older games like Battle Legends had. Mostly all of the fights are just one-on-one. There's no parts customization or different loadouts you can go with. There's not really any ranged combat at all to speak of. That may feel like a bit of an apples to oranges comparison, but I feel like one of the core demographics of people who would be interested in this game are people who would be nostalgic for the Zoids brand, because as I've said before and will continue to say later in this video, Zoids Wild did not become a runaway success with kids. I'm really happy that this game was adapted into English and released in physical copies on the Switch, because we could easily be living in a world where that didn't happen, and I overall think the game is fine. It's good enough for what it is, but it definitely had a bit of an identity crisis, as there isn't really a specific audience that I feel like really cares that this game exists, except for diehard Zoids fans like myself that don't hate Zoids Wild outright. Which I guess brings me to my unscripted rant about the Zoids Wild brand. So here we are in 2024, and I guess we can safely say that Zoids Wild in the West was a flop. And I find that particularly disappointing because, like I said before, it really kind of smothered in the crib any chances of Zoids Wild Zero getting any kind of English localization or their model kits getting adapted. And worse so was, the lack of any additional HMMs being made into from the Zoids Wild line, because there was like the Genos Spinos and like the Gillraptor were planned as a HMM. There was even like a prototype of the Gillraptor, but I think production on it was just completely halted because they just thought there was a lack of interest in it. So it's entirely possible that Zoids Wild was even a flop in Japan as well. That's definitely a shame, but it's hard to really argue with as to why that happened, because I just don't think it was anything that anybody really asked for. The more kid-oriented aesthetic of it and style of it was definitely not something that anybody was really asking for, and it just heavily clashed with everything that came before it. I think the last thing that older Zoids fans or Zoids fans familiar with the older series wanted was a series where the Zoids were, less militarized, more natural, and it was more of a kid battle show a la your Pokemon, your Bakugan, your Yokai Watch, your Zatch Bell kind of thing. Like, it really kind of had that vibe to it, whereas the older series, particularly, Chaotic Century, and then the first series really have that vibe after Chaotic Century was Wild Zero, where you had this more, militarized look. It was more like aesthetically similar to like a Gundam series. And I think that a lot of people really liked that. And I think that Zoids Wild flopping the way that it did really did not do Zoids Wild Zero any favors. I guess you could say that Zoids brand overall is doing better here in the US than it has in a long time, because the HMM kits are now properly available over here through Western distribution channels, and you can buy them at a lot more stores, a lot more websites. They show up in conventions a lot more often. So I guess it was a net positive, but I just think it's a shame that Zoids Wild itself didn't do well. The HMM Wild Liger and HMM Fang Tiger have been in my backlog for quite a while, and I haven't built them yet. I don't know where I'm going to put them when I do. Even though I didn't particularly care for the anime either, and it did kind of bounce off of me, I do think this game is pretty okay, and I even really defended the Zoids Wild model kits, the motorized ones. I thought they were well made, and even though the pieces didn't come on runner sheets and you didn't have to clip them out or anything, I thought they were really well made, and I think that more people needed to give them a chance. And I especially like the Zoids Wild Zero versions, where they, made them a lot more rugged, a lot more militarized, and added way more additional details to their armor. I think that those are wonderful reimaginings of already really solid molds, and I definitely recommend you guys check them out. But yeah, it's just kind of a shame that I really feel like Hasbro dropped the ball. I definitely think that Zoids Wild could have had a little bit more of a chance if it had a better, more serious dub and was just marketed a little bit better, maybe marketed a little bit better towards like nostalgic fans and less towards kids. And for God's sake, if you want to sell the toys to kids, you got to put them in stores, dude. Like, you got to actually put them in stores where kids can buy them, because you could only buy the Zoids Wild model kits, the Hasbro releases of them, directly from the Hasbro Pulse website, and then in like boutique, like specialty stores, like Hobbytown ordered allocations of them, but you could not go into a Walmart or Target and buy these kits. So that pretty much just smothered in the crib any chances of a random kid being like, hey, the Wild Liger looks cool. I want to buy the toy of that, of the thing I just saw on Netflix, you know? So I just think they really squandered a really good opportunity there, and it's a huge, huge, huge shame. But the Zoids fans move on. We march on and into new horizons. The Zoids 40th anniversary has been going on this year, and we've seen a lot of really cool content from that. And we have the sequel to this game, Zoids Infinity Blast, which is again, sort of an homage to the other Zoids Infinity games and a sequel to this game, and features not only Zoids Wild Zoids, but classic Zoids as well. And I'm definitely looking forward to playing that game and doing a video on it as well. Although I think I will probably actually commit to doing the Let's Play series of that game, because that game seems a lot more interesting. But it's also only in Japanese, so any kind of story dialogue or menus or anything I may not be able to properly read. But I'm still excited to play that one. So anyway, that's going to about do it for this, guys. Let me know what you guys think. I do recommend, if you're a Zoids fan, pick up this game, but I wouldn't pay more than $20 or $30 for it. And just kind of know what you're getting before you pick it up. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.